It is Cinco de Mayo and we're feeling celebratory, but there are some serious issues facing Mexicans in New York City. So we've got some slides to share with you. Mexicans in New York City growing but not gaining. So first slide up, we're going to go by the numbers. 13.5% of the city's Hispanic population is Mexican, and 5% of the overall population of the city happen to be having roots in Mexico. Now, this subgroup has grown by some 71.7% since the year 2000. By comparison, the Cuban population has actually ticked down in the city, while Mexicans continue to increase. In fact, in 2010, 8 out of 10 Mexicans under the age of 16 lived in households below 200% of the federal poverty line. That calculates to about $38,000 for a family of 3. We have some more numbers here to show you about education and unemployment. These came from the Community Service Center here in New York City, and the numbers from about 2013. But at last count, 37% of Mexican young people are enrolled in school, including just 31% of young Mexican males. Now, young Mexicans born in the U.S. work at rates similar to that of their peers. Young Mexican immigrants have very high rates of unemployment, but are often involved with low-paying jobs, the lowest paying actually. And foreign-born Mexican workers have the lowest median income group in the city, and about half of them are in poverty. So just some numbers to sort of contextualize the conversation and let you know a little bit more about Mexicans in New York, growing but not gaining. Now, the A block.
Mexicans, the city's fastest growing demographic group, are also its poorest. As we head into another election, can they translate their numbers into more political representation? We'll ask Cesar Zuniga, first vice chair of Brooklyn's Community Board 7, a proud son of immigrants from Puebla, who currently lives in Sunset Park. Cesar, thank you so much for being here on BK Live.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
Same to you.
We want to ask you first about those numbers Brian was talking about. Those are from 2013. Do any numbers stick out for you here in 2016?
Well, no, I think the numbers are pretty consistent with what I've heard. But I always like to talk about those numbers in the context of what's going well for the Mexican community. And I think also to talk about the many strengths that exist within the Mexican community. So, you know, for example, I read a statistic that during the downturn in 2007, 2008, Mexicans were the most likely to be employed across a number of sectors. So I think that speaks to the notion that, you know, Mexican families, my family, we're hard workers, and we don't come to this country just for a driver's license. You know, we come to make it and to be part of an economy and to be part of a context that allows us to have a better standard of living. So I think those numbers reflect the reality, some of the realities, but I also like to sort of contrast them with some of the things that are going well in the community.
Very cool. So one thing that is not going so well in the community might be the political climate that we're in with the presumptive GOP nominee there. So first 100 days, he's talking about this wall. So what are Mexicans in New York City doing to organize around?
Sure. So, you know, what I've heard a lot and what I've seen, folks who have held out on becoming citizens, for example, are becoming citizens in record numbers, right? Because I think this really woke them up to the reality that we could have some real unsavory characters running the government and targeting specific groups, in this case, Mexicans and Muslims, apparently. So I think that's happening. I also think, you know, I'm sort of working with some folks, and we're going to look at how do we register all of the young Mexicans who have been born in this country since, let's say, 1995, 96, who are now becoming eligible to become part of the process. So I think that's the real key there, to get some of those younger people registered and hopefully get them involved in the civic context.
Not to harp on the presidential candidate Trump, I want to know, what do people in your community really think about the possibility that he could become president? Be honest, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was just like any other community, right? Initially, no one took it very seriously. I think, you know, for us especially, though, we kind of came out of the gate swinging because he kind of attacked our community first. Right. But I think, you know, certain people are afraid, and I think part of that fear is people don't really understand the actual powers of the presidency. I mean, I think if we get out there as leaders and educate people around the fact that, let's say he becomes president. I don't think he will, but let's say he does. You don't just like say, okay, let's go build a wall. Like he doesn't have the power to do that. So there are a lot of things that I think are rhetoric, and it's unfortunate rhetoric. But I think in reality, what we have to do is educate people, get people registered to vote, and allay some of the fears that are kind of unrealistic and they're being spewed by Donald Trump, obviously.
So we know that you've gotten into the political arena and running for office, and I just wanted, you talked about bringing people into the tent actually and getting them registered. What are some of the barriers to people registering and actually taking advantage of becoming citizens here?
I think it's a priority issue, right? I think, folks who are recently arrived or folks who are from an immigrant family, I think their priorities are, in most cases, to work, to go to school, to get an education. Exactly, keeping the lights on. And so, asking them to become part of the civic process is really, it's hard work. I mean, you really have to know how to communicate a message to folks to get them involved. And I think, with Carlos's campaign, I think that began, in 2013 with his campaign. I sort of followed up in 2014 with my campaign. And I think now, during an off sort of election year, is the time to really sort of double down on the work of getting people engaged by registering them and by really helping them understand what the local and state government mean to their daily lives.
How are you organizing people within your district in Sunset Park, and how does that relate to kind of the broader way that Mexicans are being organized throughout Brooklyn and New York City?
Right. So I think there are sort of many pathways into organizing the community. I think participatory budgeting is one way, and I know Carlos has been working very intensively with his staff to really get people involved in the process through PB. Right. I think, and then there's old-fashioned getting out into the community, knocking on doors. When you're from the community, you know where people are, and I think you have to go to the people, and you have to kind of set up a soapbox on the corner and get people to listen to why it's important to register, and the door-to-door work. I think organizing with classic organizing tactics is the way to do it in the Mexican community, just like you would in any other community.
So we earlier spoke about some of the numbers about disaffected youth who are either working very low-wage jobs or not working at all or not in school. I wondered how some of the problems, we even had the comptroller here talking about millennials, and it seems like if it rains for them, it's really pouring for these Mexican youth. Yeah.
I think particularly some of the undocumented youth have it really, it's a tough road. You're bombarded with messages around the need for you to normalize your status, because without it, there's not very far you can go. And I think, there is a situation of, getting these kids to understand that, there is hope. I mean, you can't just kind of decide that the pathway seems so narrow that you're not gonna aspire. You're not gonna want to have some kind of set some goals. And I think part of what we have to do as leaders is obviously work to bring about comprehensive reform to our immigration system, and B, support young people across the board. And when I mean support, I mean their families, them as youth, and looking at them as a whole family, not just individual people. So I think part of what we have to do is double down on some of the social services that are available to young people.
Can we talk more about Sunset Park, your community where you're a leader? I want to know what kind of changes you've seen there, what you think is in store there for the future. I mean, it's a neighborhood that's near and dear to my own heart, but I'd like to hear from the perspective of a leader there. What's happening in Industry City? There's going to be a proposed, what do you call it, monorail that's going in there? Cable car?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because we're in the midst of a lot of change in Sunset Park, and I think there are a lot of people who are passionate about preserving a certain kind of Sunset Park, and I think there are folks who have come in recently and who have a slightly different vision. My perspective is that change is going to happen, and I think we as leaders and I think folks in the community have a responsibility to manage that change, to be involved in that change, and not to just create context where we're just kind of being confrontational with one another, because I think, if we all participate, we can all have our voices heard and figure out a way of ushering in some of that change at a pace that's comfortable, and also in a way that allows us to really define what kind of community we want to have. So change is absolutely happening in Sunset Park, and it's pretty remarkable, and there is tension, and we have to kind of figure out how to manage that.
So looking at the landscape in the city, there seems to be like this curve of gaining your political power, like African Americans experience it, Puerto Ricans experience, just by the numbers. It's like, you guys are up.
Yeah.
You're next. So what have you learned from the previous generations that have gone before to really add a voice to that change that's coming, like the monorail or industry city, and we need green space, and Elizabeth Ampere is out there fighting for environmental justice and all of these things.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And, look, unlike, let's say, African Americans or some other ethnic minority in New York City, Mexicans are really scattered across the 5 boroughs. Yeah. And so it's really hard to find. Sunset Park has a large concentration of Mexicans. Unfortunately, some of those folks are still undocumented and not able to participate in the process. So I think the key for any Mexican leader, and I think Carlos is the guy who sort of demonstrated that, the key is building coalitions. The key is building coalitions with the folks who are African American, who are
dispersed.
Absolutely. You're so dispersed. We have Asian folks. Exactly. So I think part of the key to success is to build coalitions and to to be a political candidate that just happens to be Mexican and not a Mexican candidate who is going to just focus on one part of the community.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what's next for the future of the Mexican community here in Brooklyn?
I think it's a bright future. I think, there are, the combination of hardworking and entrepreneurial, this entrepreneurial spirit, I think that's really going to pay dividends in the future. Again, people don't walk across the desert for 5 days to get a driver's license. They come here to work and to improve their quality of life. And I think this country, this city is, the place that affords us that opportunity. And I think, folks who really want to make it will, and I think the Mexican community falls under that label of wanting to make it.
Absolutely. Keep on grinding.
Absolutely.
It's like
that's it. Keep on going.
So before we get out of here, can you tell us something wonderful and beautiful about Puebla and something that makes you proud to be Mexican, so we don't just feel like jerks having margaritas today because it's Cinco de Mayo?
I think the values that come from Puebla and from people like my parents, hardworking, respectful of others, really valuing getting along in the world and being a good person in the world. And I really sort of, when I think back to how my parents raised me, and I think back to all of the Poblanos and Mexicans in general, I think that those values of respecting and wanting to just kind of get along with folks, I think those are the values that I really proud of and make me, proud of my heritage.
And Cesar, I'm going to put you on the spot. For people watching, what's the most authentic place to get great Mexican food today in Sunset Park, so that no one goes to Chipotle?
Oh my goodness!
Nobody at Taco Bell.
Save us from Taco Bell.
There are a number of taquerias that I love, and I'm going to mention a couple, and I'm going to get nailed.
First among equals. They're all your favorites.
Absolutely. But there's El Bronco that's on 44th and 4th, and there's Tacos Matamoros between 45th and 46th. Awesome, authentic Mexican food.
That's great.
Yeah.
We love Sunset Park. We love you. Thank you very much for being here. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
You guys got me in trouble.
No, you're going to get a free meal out of it. Big plug. Thank you, Cesar. Happy Cinco de Mayo again.